Dr. Moran. How are you?
Well, I'm well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So let's get into it. Why do you think change management is important for people in their career?
So I think really for a couple of reasons. One is change leadership or good change leadership is just good leadership. So I think many people are doing a lot of things already that are working. But change, leading through change requires a bit more focus from leaders around managing the emotional side of change. So I think from a change management perspective, I've seen organizations get better at the project aspects of change, the technical side of change, where I see people or leaders, really humans, struggling is the emotional side and how do we work through that? And to answer your question, that's why it matters. We don't, as leaders, control anybody's decision to change. I like to say years of therapy, and I'm still realizing I can't make anybody do anything. Um, but we can influence how quickly somebody gets on board with the change. And usually, what prevents leaders from doing those things is their own discomfort around, am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to do the right thing? What if I still don't have a lot of information or I'm not 100% on board with the change? So I think it matters so that the organizations who make these decisions can get the results that they're looking for sooner rather than later.
Okay. So I think there are two aspects. The one aspect is you talked about the change. Then there are people that will easily embrace change, but on the opposite spectrum are people that always resist change. So, in your opinion, why do people resist change, and how can we, what is one action that you can recommend for people to know how, in terms of knowing how to embrace and adopt change in their lives?
So those are, I think, both two really good questions. So I'm going to ask you a question. When do you think change is a good idea?
Well, I'll say change is always, like they say, a constant thing, right? So when is change a good idea? When change is going to make me better, it's a good idea. When change is going to improve the way we do things, it's a great idea. When change will create a good outcome for everyone involved, I'll say it's a good thing.
Yes, and so you've just said it beautifully. The challenge is change is a good idea when it's our idea.
Okay, I
Okay.
like, that's true.
So what you're saying is the reasons why most organizations make changes. They usually make a change for a reason that makes sense to those who are deciding on what the change is. And this is typically the challenge with change in organizations. And it really, the fact that it remains challenging is not a problem. It's kind of normal. And it's basically because in most organizations, a small group of people decides on a change. They've had time to look at what the different options are. They've had time to consider the problem. So they have had time to weigh what is the right thing. They might understand from their perspective more about the why. So unfortunately, most team leaders and their teams are asked to implement a change that they didn't decide on.
Mhm.
And people resist change primarily, it is a hardwired response in us. So that old phrase that people view change as a threat is hardwired. So it is absolutely normal that when somebody has been doing something a certain way and they're relatively successful or it's good enough and somebody changes something, the first question they have is, "Oh my gosh, what's gonna it mean for me?" Okay, that's one.
Oh.
Two is, or I should say, at the same time, our brains, it's called a negativity bias. So this
Mhm.
goes to why do people resist? The negativity bias is all about our brains giving at least three times more psychological weight to the negative than the positive. So when a change is introduced, we are like, oh my gosh, it's a threat. Again, normal. Anything that changes, really, our ego, it's a few steps for our ego, even if it sounds all pretty, for, oh, you're going to change the system for how you do this. Oh, I'm going to have to learn something new. Oh, what if I'm not good at it? I'll be fired. I'm destitute. I'm dead. Like it really is that. And a lot of that second half is unconscious. But that is what your ego is designed to do to avoid death. And everything is a life death decision. So that's usually what we're coming up against. We oftentimes need time, first of all, just to allow it to digest.
Mhm.
And then we need a leader who will, number one, have compassion for that, to take time to figure out what, when you, this gets into your second part of your question, what can leaders do? So I have three priorities: compassion, communication, and clarity. Newsflash, this isn't anything new. Most leaders already do this. What I try to do is make it practical. So
Mhm.
compassion is absolutely about empathy, but it's about me taking a minute to say, huh, if Bull is my leader, I hope he would have it take a minute before he talks to me and say, hey, if I was in Elizabeth's shoes, how might she be feeling about this change? It's a 5 minute thing. So I can just be a little bit more prepared for whatever her reaction is.
Mhm.
That's one. Two is communication. I don't just do a one-way tell. I actually say, hey, Elizabeth, you've heard about this change. What is it that excites you or concerns you about this from your perspective, and what might be unclear? That's the second thing I can do is simply ask. And we'll
Mhm.
talk about what prevents managers, if you want to, from doing each one of those things.
Right.
And then the third thing is clarity. And most leaders kind of roll their eyes at those people who don't seem to think they have to do anything different as a result of the change. But oftentimes, that's also neuroscience. There's two things going on. One, most organizations reward people for doing things correct. When you're asking me to learn something new, I'm probably going to make mistakes. And unless there's celebration of that and giving me an opportunity to learn versus perfection, I'm going to default to the old behaviors.
Right.
So clarity is all about, am I clear? Are you clear on what specifically has to be done differently on a day-to-day basis as a result of the change? So while each of those priorities, there are different actions, I'd say those are the three things leaders can do. The biggest thing is the leader's mindset,
Mhm.
which is, if you encounter resistance, it's not a problem. So you don't have to, it can be frustrating at times, but it's not a problem. It's normal. So if the leader can just say, hey, if I encounter resistance, I'm not going to fight it. I'm going to become curious. So in other words, if I can shift my mindset from resistance as a problem to resistance or just concerns that haven't been addressed yet, it's
Right.
very hard for me to stay in frustration when I become curious.
Okay. This is good. I like the three C's: compassion, communication, and clarity. And I truly think that if we as leaders can implement or practice or adopt all these three, it will make it a little easier. I'm not saying that change is something easy. People resist change from time to time, but it
Most of the time.
is they will understand the why, and I know if they understand the why, they will be more likely to get on board and go with what the leader is saying. So thank you for sharing that. Now, in terms of change in an organization, how can we measure the readiness of a team to accept change?
I think the measuring the readiness is interesting. Um, I know that in so much of the great literature on change, it talks about the different things, stakeholder interviews, going in advance and doing these things to start to seed the idea, right, in pieces.
Mhm.
What I have found in my life inside organizations is that most leaders do this off the side of their desk. Even the senior leaders in the C-suite who are making changes, it is a bit more rare that somebody has a dedicated change management function. So again, readiness is simply a version of the compassion, right? So I'd say there's two things. First of all, as a team, do you have a very clear one page communication, or even I'd say message, that's what's changing? And Bola, you mentioned a really important point, which is the second question is, why are we doing this? And
Exactly.
maybe some version of what happens if we don't.
Hmm.
Then there's a, which starts to rely more on the team leader. What actions are we moving from and moving to? So people understand there are some differences. And then we're looking for what are the benefits? And so many organizations talk about the what specifically is changing and what we hope to benefit, which is usually related to customers, clients, efficiency,
Hmm.
but they leave out that whole middle part.
Right.
And so readiness, I'd say, is two things. One, from a project aspect, are we as the leaders of a change clear on what the change is? You'd be surprised how many of them don't see it in the same way, though it might be titled the same thing. And are we communicating it in the same way?
Right.
One, that's one. And then two is and then when we actually talk to people, and this is where I find there's a lack of patience, as I think senior leaders are struggling even more with the complexity. So sometimes their patience to bring people along is less, but then the readiness is okay, somebody on that senior committee is allowing one of their people to say, okay, you imagine you're the naysayer. Put that hat on. We
Mhm.
want you to say, to really give us what are all the things that concern you so we can start to address it. So when I was working with one organization, they had to announce a really painful change, which was a division was going to be closing. A number, like hundreds of people were losing their job. There's
Mhm.
no way to communicate that where people are going to be like, yeah,
Yeah. People will be sad. Yeah.
exactly. So, but what he did was two things that any leader can do. One is the first thing he said was, if I was in your shoes.
Mm.
So he really made it okay to say, listen, if I was in your shoes, here are the things that'd be going through my mind. Oh my God, am I going to have a job? And I better look for now and blah, blah, blah. So he helped create, I think, some trust about, listen, this is hard. Your reactions are normal and I hear you and it's fine. It's okay. The second thing he did was very clearly say, there are things I can tell you now because I can tell you. There are things I can't tell you because I don't know yet. But we're going to meet every day after five. At 5 o'clock, he had a meeting where he invited anybody to come, ask their questions. He'd take them down and then he'd report out that way in other channels, answering other questions that people had.
Mhm.
And then the third thing he said is, and there are things I can't tell you because I can't tell you.
Mhm.
Right. And most people understand in organizational life that that's normal. But when people hear that your feelings are normal, validating, no matter what the change is, of course, well done, human, you have a good brain. You're like, whoa, good.
Mhm.
But we're going to use that to our advantage, which is I'm going to engage you. The problem is so many leaders are afraid to engage. And one reason they're afraid to engage is they don't, many leaders, it's a myth. They feel like they have to be 100% on board to
Right.
lead through a change. You don't.
Mhm.
You absolutely don't. You can say, and actually, your authenticity, again, when thoughtfully worded, is your greatest advantage. So a leader can say, you know what? I want to bring us together. This change is happening. Let me hear from you all. What excites you? What concerns you? What do you think might be gained? What might be lost? And then as things come up, the leader can say, you know what? I'm going to go first. Here are some concerns I have. So we're still going to do the change, but
Right.
let's talk about how we're going to do this together.
Mhm.
And we are going to be successful. But let's get out in front of some of this stuff. So it's okay to invite it. And the second thing is leaders hate saying, as you know, I don't know. Right. So they're afraid to communicate if they don't have all the answers.
That's
And
right.
a mini brain hack I have for leaders is If you go in and thinking a successful meeting is having all the answers, of course you're not going to want to have that conversation. But
Mhm.
how about you go in and the goal of that meeting is to walk out with at least 20 unanswered questions, right? That's success. So you can say to folks, here's the goal, let's have it. Okay, great. What's another question? And at the end of the meeting, you've got 20. Woohoo! It's a success. And
Right.
then you let people know what you're going to do with that information. But so much of this just is like if you can just alter and shift your perspective a bit, it will make it easier on everybody.
So, in the story you just shared with me about the leader meeting the people that were going to go through a layoff, I
Mhm.
think all the three elements of compassion, communication, and clarity were all in combined whatever he did with his team. And that's a
100%.
classic example of how to lead and manage change. So thank you for sharing that. Now, we are going to go and talk now about your book, Forward. Leading your team through change. The first thing, I want to know the why. Why did you write that book, Dr. Moran?
So I think exactly what you were saying is so many leaders have the intention of doing this well, but they lack the resources. So I would say briefly, my contribution is Cotter and so many others have written great material, which I have learned inside organizations. Most leaders find it very difficult to implement all of those things well. So my goal was first, no matter if you where you were in an organization and what support you were getting, this book is a handbook. So it was more for those folks who have to lead through a change, lead their team where they didn't decide on it. That's one. Two, I titrate out kind of the best practices and so hopefully make it simple. So for instance, as I said, I have those three priorities, and then very practically, I give conversation guides. So I say, here are the four toughest questions you'll probably get, and here's how to answer them. So I actually give people the words to use because most people struggle that you can edit. And so I think that's another thing that is makes it unique is that people can actually lift and shift and use it right away. I also do it in a format where I use a bullet point. I'm like, please don't make me read a 300-page business book. I would lose my mind. Okay, I can't do it. So just trying to keep it simple. And then lastly, it's the neuroscience. So I am not a neuroscientist, but I'm a brain nerd and I love when I can, again, I can sort of take something and help people understand whether you have an engineering brain where you thought the emotion was fluff or you're very intuitive and emotionally minded, either of those groups benefit from knowing this is how we're hardwired as humans. So when you know these, and I use five basic things, I really simplify it. Here's the concept, here's what it means for you as a change leader. But I think that helps people understand and actually have more compassion about why they and other people react the way we do. And how do you use that to your advantage? So, what are the actions you can take that actually work with the neuroscience and not against it?
Okay. So I see that you wrote about Jaguar change strategy.
Jaguar change strategy? No, but it was, hey, when you have something that goes wrong, and I think people thought that potentially that strategy on their marketing and their branding backfired.
Oh, okay.
So that was it. So it was like, huh, to your point. And listen, they might have done everything right in the information they had, but part of it is, are you open? The main lesson there is, are you open to hearing a different perspective?
Okay. Okay.
And part of that is exactly, and that goes into as a leadership team, sometimes we're working so fast. And when you have power dynamics, sometimes people aren't comfortable saying no to power. And so, especially if you need people in your organization to behave differently, you
Mhm.
want them to do something different. It's much easier if you can find a way to involve them to make sure you're considering in advance what could go wrong. Because if you look at somebody's feedback or information that's different than your perspective, it is very easy. Our egos look at that as a threat. It just do, right? That's why it's so hard for people to listen to other people. But if you can allow a little bit to say, we still can make this choice. I don't have to give up my own perspective. I really don't. I can hold on to it as long as I want, but can I hear so I can prepare? And that's really what we're doing. We're trying to give leaders as much data as possible
Right.
in order to then make the best decision or be prepared if something does go wrong. What's plan B or sometimes plan C?
Okay. So I think somehow you may have answered my next question. I was going to ask about how to handle maybe resistance from employees. Let's say they've been in an organization for decades and you are bringing, let's say, a new process. And it has happened to me before. I was trying to implement a new change process and many people they were resistant initially, but I did something, and you mentioned it. You said involve them, and that was the first step that I did. No, maybe second step, because initially I just said, "Oh, guys, this is a new process. Let's start doing it this way." And
You're
they were
doing your job. Exactly.
all looking at me like, "What is he talking about?" Then I started, I scheduled a one-on-one meeting with the team, show them the benefit, and that was me involving them and letting them also try the new process. And once they saw the benefit, they were on board. So
Well done, you. Well done.
now the question back to you. So how do you undo employees' resistance to change?
Yes. I mean, I think there's two things I talk about. Again, I'm just trying to keep it really simple. The first thing is one of the neuroscience concepts you're dealing with there is called switch cost. The idea is every time we switch how we do something, there's a cost,
That's right.
right? And that cost, usually with everybody, is a slowdown or a dip in productivity. Having said that, a cost, as what you just said, if I feel like I have mastery, now
Mhm.
you're asking me to be a beginner again.
Yeah,
Maybe I was the go-to. Our ego doesn't like that.
at all. I learned that the hard way.
Yes, as I like to say, we as humans, we learn things the hard way or the harder way. But you learned the hard way because you pivoted. It
Yeah.
could have been worse if you just ignored them, right? So again, well done you. So switch cost, and this is the paradox of this idea of learning something new. When there's a switch cost, we have discomfort. But when we have discomfort, it usually means there's behavior change.
Mhm.
So think about any habit or even something that you think initially, like, oh, I'd love to learn to play guitar. And then you have fantasies, you'll be on a stage when you're younger, right? Playing and whatever. Then you actually start to try to learn. And it's really hard and you give it up. So the first thing with switch cost is understanding that staying in the inspiration phase or the I'll think about doing it. Oh, yeah, 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 I'll do it, is different than doing it because there's no switch cost.
Right.
The challenge for the team leader and the team is to understand that when we are feeling uncomfortable and it's taking more effort, that's a good thing.
Mhm.
In other words, when there's discomfort, there's switch costs, you're more likely to get behavior change. If there's no discomfort, no switch cost, no change. And so this is why it's so important to do what you did, which is let's involve you. Let me start to make it okay for you. And one of the things I say is it's very important when you can celebrate somebody trying something new, even if it was an epic fail. You can give them a gift card and say, "Who had the best epic fail? Let's celebrate that." Woo! Right? And you make it fun because our egos don't like that. It doesn't feel good. Right? We get embarrassed. You're dealing with shame, and we know what people do when there's shame. It could do awful things because they're terrified. So it's easier to reward for that if you try to reward only for perfection, then people are more likely to default because they're not going to feel comfortable. So I hope that
No, that's
answers the
that's
question.
thank you. So, what's the most impactful leadership lessons that you've learned in your career?
I'd say the bottom line for me there is strengths and using strengths. So when I was at ADP acquired the Marcus Buckingham Company, and Marcus started at Gallup, and then he's written a number of books, a bunch of research on strengths. At first, when I heard that, I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit internally, because I thought it was a little more fluff. But then when I really understood the neuroscience and I saw the impact. So, using strengths, and this is what optimism is, the fifth neuroscience concept I talk about. What we now know is optimism isn't just the result of doing something well that you feel. Optimism is actually the fuel needed to get those results. And by that, I mean using optimism isn't about ignoring challenges or difficulties. It's simply helping to free a brain that is stuck in fear or anxiety. So, as an example, anytime we're going through change, and in the company I was in, I have my own business now, so it's different. We do have some time to talk about what are you concerned about, what might be lost, and then people are still feeling uncomfortable because they don't have all the answers. If you can say as a leader, okay, I know it's uncomfortable that you don't have the answers, and guess what? That's neuroscience. Anything that we don't know could kill us. Remember the ego? That's right. They could come out and surprise us. So it's saying then to the person, is not having that information right now stopping you from doing your job? Most of the time, the answer will be no. And it's like, okay. And then you put people back in their strengths. Okay, let's talk about some of the things that you feel like you do really well and how are you doing those things. Let's talk about an accomplishment or something that you're proud of. That's some way to help the person because again, you can't be in fear and optimism at the same time. And then it's also saying, I honor the fact that you're concerned. As a matter of fact, I appreciate your concern. That means you're aware. That's great. So let's talk about how we can address some of those. And in the meantime, let's put you back in your strengths. What I discovered though is so many people are so used to beating themselves up and used to the negative because the negativity bias that it took them some time to develop those, oh, yay me, strengths muscles, because most of us were told that would make us arrogant, and that's baloney. All
Mhm.
right. So part of it is how do you use strengths thoughtfully, appreciate and celebrate, right? Because again, most people in organizations, when they're deeply involved, they can't see. They can't see any positive impact from their efforts. So it's important to share little wins along the way. It gives people the resilience to keep making the effort. And then it also makes it okay to say, listen, maybe this is rough right now, and maybe this change in this moment isn't good. But so let's remember a time when we went through a change and we thought it was going to be awful, but we got through it and maybe it wasn't as bad as we thought. So it's up to the leader to be able to say it's not about ignoring challenges or being, overly Pollyanna. It's simply saying, let's think about what could go right and what is going right, because that is the antidote to the negativity bias.
Okay, that's so good. So, as we are wrapping up, we'll go to our rapid fire questions. Let's get to know you more. So, Dr. Moran, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Coffee, okay. What's your favorite leadership book beside the one that you wrote?
Uh, that's a good one. I think my favorite one, I'm actually looking. Oh my gosh, there's so many. I think it's the difficult conversations. That was a great one.
One word to describe your leadership style.
Strengths, using
Uh,
strengths.
Strengths. I like you. You've been saying strengths, so we need to go find our strengths. I like that. The best piece of career advice you've ever received.
I see the woman. She said, Elizabeth, remember, you have an idea, and it could be a great idea, but until your name is on the awning,
Mhm.
it may not be an idea whose time has come. So ultimately, she was saying, let's figure out what battles you want to fight. And how do you, right? So how do you have patience?
Mm,
And that was really important advice for me.
pick your battle. So, what's one thing leaders should stop doing immediately?
Oh, immediately stop. Okay, this is probably a controversial one. Stop using the adage, we have to do more with less.
Do not
That's
product.
insanity.
Okay, okay. No, it's you said it. It's gonna be controversial. So, what's your favorite way to unwind after a long day of work
I think being in nature.
in nature?
I just
So,
really connecting with
who
that.
inspires you the most in business leadership?
Who inspires me the most? I honestly, I'd say, I mean, so many people, and they're really, I'd say the middle manager. I don't have a particular person who every single day is feeling squeezed, but trying to honor the direction of the company, but also who loves their team and is trying to balance that.
Okay, thank you. So, finally, where can my audience find you?
So
And
two things.
oh,
Yep. Yep. So one thing is if you feel free to find me on LinkedIn, it's Dr. Elizabeth Moran. One, two, the book is available, Amazon, wherever you want. It's also an audiobook. Because I use a bullet point in scripts, I think it's a little bit better. Maybe I shouldn't say this, a little bit better in print, but the audio is still valuable because you get a PDF download. And then if you want to learn more about the change work, it's elizabethmorantransformation.com.
it's time to transform people's life. Thank you very much, Dr. Moran. I truly, truly appreciate your time on the show today.
Thank you, Bola.